Started. Good afternoon. Today is February the 4th, and this is the bill hearings of the Ways and Means Committee. First, we have up with us for House Bill 390, Chair Corman, and there are two folks that I believe are on your panel virtually, Melissa Bondi and Rob Goldman. This side, we got to get y'all doing better. I don't know what's going on with this side over here. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. I think there might also be some visitors coming from the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm presenting the Affordable Housing Payment in Lieu of Taxes Expansion Act, HB 390. We have in existing law a variety of programs where affordable housing can be done in partnership with local governments, but that is generally limited to new construction or substantially rehabilitated construction. What we have found in Montgomery County, and I know we're facing many other jurisdictions, is we have naturally occurring affordable housing where the market has sort of made that housing affordable. And we have sort of an opportunity where the market can either come in and tear down that housing and basically raise the rents to more of a market rent with a new product, or we can preserve that housing in its existing form and make it naturally occurring affordable housing. And so this bill would expand what local governments are allowed to do, not required to do, what they're allowed to do in negotiating payment in lieu of taxes agreements with these naturally occurring affordable housing providers. The legislation does have a 50% rate in it. I will be, and I've already emailed with your council about an amendment to lower that to 30%. But allow counties to go higher if they want to. So it'll be sort of up to the counties to decide if they want to do a higher level of affordability. Of course, affordability is already defined in our existing state law. So that's the purpose of the bill. It's to allow us to use one of our very successful tools, payment in lieu of taxes, not only to sort of have new and significantly rehabilitated buildings, but also naturally occurring affordable housing maintained as affordable housing stock as we deal with our housing shortfall and challenges in the state of Maryland. And that's the bill, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Goldman, for 2 minutes, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. My name's members of the committee, Chair. My name is Robert Goldman, and I'm the president of Montgomery Housing Partnership. And we are an affordable housing developer in both Montgomery County and Prince George's County, and testifying in strong support of House Bill 390, which will provide additional flexibility for local jurisdictions to provide pilots for affordable housing. Pilots are an important tool. We face really an important housing crisis in this state, and pilots are an important tool for us to both create and preserve affordable housing. Oftentimes in the market, we are competing to preserve much needed affordable housing, whether that's income restricted affordable housing or housing that just is naturally occurring affordable housing. We cannot afford to lose that housing stock. It's just so important. And as Delegate Corman mentioned, in Montgomery County, we enacted, or the council enacted, an automatic pilot for projects that meet certain affordability criteria. But many of the nonprofits were unable to take advantage of those pilots because the state current authorizing laws limited the pilots to only properties that are engaged in comprehensive renovation or new construction. So the purpose of this, and so what we're seeing, and that purpose served well when it first was enacted, but now we're seeing a number of what we call naturally occurring affordable housing, properties that don't need major renovations. And the purpose of this law, which we support, would allow local jurisdictions more flexibility to allow pilots for these naturally occurring affordable housing developments. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bondi, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of Enterprise Community Partners. My name is Melissa Bondi. I'm the Senior Director in the Mid-Atlantic region. Enterprise is a national level affordable housing and community development nonprofit. We were founded and headquartered right here in Maryland, and we currently operate 76 apartment communities and more than 7,500 homes that are the vast majority committed affordable across the state. We also support the legislation, and we appreciate very much Delegates Kornman, Fair, Paklovich, Carr, and other co-sponsors for introducing the legislation. In addition to what Mr. Goldman has said, we are finding increasingly that affordable housing providers need to acquire at-risk properties to prevent them from being lost to market rate pressures serving Marylanders who need more affordable housing. This absolutely includes projects that don't necessarily need immediate extensive rehabilitation and repair and would not therefore meet the pilot criteria under substantial rehab under the law today. We also see projects where repairs are planned but need to be put off into the future because there are more projects who need funding than we have funding available for affordable housing. And so projects that need to wait for future fiscal years don't have access to this pilot financing to support them in making the acquisition in the first place to make sure that those units aren't lost forever to market pressures. So we really appreciate and support the pilot law being changed. We also appreciate Delegate Corman's interest in making the affordability requirements at the state level a bit more flexible. There are multiple federal programs that currently allow for more flexibility, and there are some existing residents on a project site that may not have the exact affordability or income levels to meet the existing standards. So we think that this will take a good program, make it even more eligible and applicable to other projects across the state. We urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Chair Corman or his panel? Okay, seeing none, we do have some other folks testifying in favor. Kevin Canali. There is no name, but is there somebody here from Social Work Advocates for Social Change? Come up. And then Brian Anlou, come on, yep. And then we should have Andrew Friesen and Kashana Cross virtually, but we'll start with the folks that are here. And Mr. Goldman and Ms. Bondi, thank you. You two can be excused. Mr. Canali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of the bill. Everyone has already said all the wonderful things that this bill does. For us, this closes a loophole. It basically lets us do what you wanted us to do when you passed this legislation, enabling a pilot for these kind of properties, another tool in the toolbox to afford affordable housing. And we appreciate the sponsors' willingness to take a look at the affordability threshold, as I think that would make it more flexible and more available for more local governments across the state. So we'd ask for a favorable report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brian Anlou with the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington. Glad to finally be able to support a bill in this committee. As you heard from Chair Corman, there's considerable pressure on naturally occurring affordable housing projects in communities to redevelop. A lot of that pressure is from rising operating expenses and increasing capital needs for these typically older properties. And so we support the bill and we support the Chair Corman's amendment to reduce the threshold from 50% to 30%. We think that will provide a little bit more flexibility. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm Phil St. John. I am representative of the University of Maryland Social Work Advocates for Social Change. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. We also are in strong support of HB 390. Looking at the level of affordable housing that Maryland is short, any program that we can use that increases the flexibility, especially at the local levels, to be able to finance and produce more affordable units at a faster pace is something that we can certainly stand behind. It puts the power, this bill puts the power in the hands of the local counties and property owners who have the best knowledge of the needs, and so we strongly urge a support of HB 390.
Thank you. Do we have Mr. Friedson with us virtually?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we can't see you. Can we see you?
It says the host needs to share my video.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, Councilman, good to see you whenever you're ready.
Good to see you as well. Thank you so much, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, Members of the committee, I really appreciate you allowing me to join you virtually. You have written testimony from me, but just wanted to quickly share some highlights and want to thank Delegate Corman in particular for his leadership, as well as Senator Hedelman for cross-filing this, and the co-sponsors as well on the committee, including Delegate Plakovich-Carr. In 2021, I had sponsored the legislation that you heard about earlier at the local level in Montgomery County to create an automatic pilot. What this bill will allow is not just in Montgomery County, but in jurisdictions across the state, for us to have that tool be much more effective, to clarify the existing state law, and really to update this tool in our toolkit for preservation of affordable housing that has changed in the nature of how a lot of our nonprofit providers are acquiring property. When the authorizing legislation was initially passed, many market rate apartment communities that were acquired by affordable housing providers were in significant disrepair and need of major immediate rehabilitation, which was allowed under the authorizing legislation. But with the current nature of acquisitions, which don't always require that level of rehabilitation, and certainly not immediately, this prevents, existing law at least, prevents the taking advantage of this tool in our toolkit at the local level. So this bill clarifies that. It would allow for flexibility. I appreciate the sponsors' interest in trying to make this helpful in other jurisdictions by lowering the threshold to provide greater flexibility. We're certainly open to that and supportive of that. And ultimately, this is just another way for us to work together at the state level and the local level to have more tools in our toolkit to address the preservation of affordable housing, which we know we have a crisis in Montgomery County, in Maryland, and in jurisdictions throughout the country. So I really appreciate the interest in this bill. I would urge and respectfully request a favorable report, and happy to answer any questions you might have, and just want to express my appreciation as well for your interest in this legislation and in addressing our housing affordability challenges more generally.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councilman Friedson? Okay, thank you for popping on. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do we have Kashana Cross? Oh, she's not here. Okay. Any questions? No questions. Okay, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 390. Mr. Chair, House Bill 412.
We have a panel, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm coming before you with House Bill 412. This is the Local Board of Elections Transparency Act. This actually builds off of legislation we passed on a statewide basis related to State Board of Elections that I co-sponsored with Delegate Buckle, but he's not here, so I guess pointing that out is not all that helpful with you, Madam Chair. But for a number of years, we've now required our State Board of Elections to do a number of extra transparency provisions beyond what's required under the Open Meetings Act. So we now think it's time to maybe move that on to the local boards of elections. Frankly, a lot of our local boards are already doing elements of this bill, and many of them are doing even more of it during COVID. So the ability to do it is there. It's just a question of making sure they are as transparent as possible. What the legislation does, it requires the local boards to publish their agendas, written testimony, finalized documents, and all relevant materials on their websites 48 hours before every meeting. For all open meetings, the local boards must live stream their meetings and then publish and maintain an archive of those meetings for 5 years worth of footage. And then something that, of course, doesn't apply to the state board that we pose for the local boards is to require a live stream of their canvassing around election time. I did note in the fiscal note, there's sort of a wide range of responses, but one of the worst responses was from Howard County. Would never want to do anything to harm Howard County in particular. So happy to work with you, Madam Chair, on any ways we can kind of mitigate the fiscal note. Again, a number of other county boards are already doing this, so I think the cost should be manageable, but we want to make sure we're not doing anything to cause fiscal harm to our county partners, Howard County in particular. And so that's the legislation, Madam Chair, just another modest step forward on our government transparency efforts.
Thank you.
Do you want to go?
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and members of the committee. My name is Morgan Drayton. I am the Policy and Engagement Manager for Common Cause Maryland, here in support of HB 412, which would significantly increase the transparency of local boards of elections and boards of canvassers by making them subject to open meetings requirements. Many Marylanders would like to be more active participants in the work done by state agencies and other public bodies, but are unable to attend meetings in person. And for those who are able to attend in person or virtually if online streaming is available, they may not have access to the meeting materials or may show up to find that there is an unexpected closed session. HB 412 addresses this issue by requiring meeting agendas and materials be made available in advance of the meeting, that meetings are made publicly available by live stream, and that all streams and materials are archived promptly after the meeting has adjourned. These are easy and efficient ways to enhance Marylanders' access and help demystify some of the less widely understood processes, like what happens to your mail-in ballot once you've signed and returned it. Many public bodies and agencies already stream their meetings, but these advanced meeting requirements would ensure Marylanders can meaningfully access meetings where the decisions that impact their lives and communities are being made. HB 412 will vastly increase Marylanders' access to meetings and materials and will help increase public participation and understanding of government processes. And for these reasons, we would request a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland-Delaware DC Press Association, and we sit in support and thanks to Delegate Corman for House Bill 412. As Morgan shared and Nancy will also share, this is an important step forward. I think it just systematizes and makes a more reliable, consistent experience across the local boards of elections. As Delegate Corman mentioned, many of these elements are already in place, and we do feel like it is something that is important for not only transparency and access to the process, but also will make reporting a little bit more consistent and easier to be maintained and also to report on remotely. So for those reasons, we do ask for a favorable report, and thank you for your consideration.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury and Vice Chair Wilkins. My name is Nancy Soring here representing the League of Women Voters of Maryland. As you probably know, one of the foundations of the League is to have active and informed participation in government at all levels, and that's absolutely what this bill seeks to do. I've been coming to Annapolis for more than 20 years, in fact, even before Delegate Corman was elected. And I've seen a profound difference in the ability for the public to be informed about and participate in the democratic process. So therefore, we support this bill and all the provisions therein. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the governor and his panel?
You're going to get me in trouble, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have two other folks here, Alan Lang and Kevin Canali. And I'll just verify that Kashana Cross, she's not here. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of the bill with an amendment. You have my written testimony, very much supportive of all the provisions in the bill. The bill sponsor did mention the fiscal note. That's partially the reason I'm here. We just want to make sure that this does not place an undue burden and an unfunded mandate on our local boards of elections. So I'm confident we can work with the committee and with the bill sponsor to mitigate those concerns. The other thing, just some practical stuff. In the bill, it talks about live streaming on a website. We'd just like to clarify, a lot of the local boards of elections use the county government website. So if there were a way to say that we could maybe link it to a live YouTube stream, it wouldn't have to necessarily just live stream on the page. I think that would mitigate some concerns in terms of IT costs. And then just a lot of times local boards will canvass in multiple buildings. So just keep that in mind in terms of cost. And some local boards have raised concerns about broadband access and the ability to actually live stream from where they are inside of a county. So again, confident that we can address these issues, but we just wanted to raise them for the committee. Happy to take questions and happy to work with the committee and the bill sponsor on these issues. So with that, we'd ask for a favorable report with the amendment.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I'm Alan Lang from Harwood, Maryland. I'd like to commend Anne Arundel County's board for implementing this already. I used to attend the meetings in person and didn't have access to the documents in advance. And that was when I was in Pasadena and nearby. Now I'm down in South County. It's a lot easier for me to watch it on streaming. They do a very good job of getting the materials out in advance. So the other counties who haven't done this yet, perhaps they might want to talk to Anne Arundel to see how they did it. And I very much would like to see a favorable report for 412. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Madam Vice Chair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Canale, thank you so much for your testimony. And you mentioned some amendments. It sounds like perhaps you're working through and thinking through what those could be. I just wanted to ask that you submit some specific language to help mitigate those concerns to the committee so that we can get working on this bill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We'll look forward to those amendments.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 412. Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 426, is Delegate Kaiser here? Okay, no. Who do we have here? Delegate Chisholm isn't here. Delegate Charkoudian, I do not see. I thought I saw Delegate Williams at some point. Is she here? Do we have anybody here? Okay, we'll jump to you. Delegate Wims, House Bill 322.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I ask my panel, could you ask my panel to come forward? Okay, it's coming forward. While they're coming. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and fellow members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Greg Wims, and I'm presenting HB 322, Election Law, State Administrator of Elections, Municipal Elections. The bill would enable the State Administrator of Elections to enter into a memorandum of understanding for municipalities to provide state assistance in administering municipal elections. This simply codifies the working relationship between the state and municipalities so that the current and future State Board of Election administrators will be operating in accordance with state law when assisting municipal elections. This is an emergency bill. It will possibly impact the municipal elections that will be happening earlier this year. There is also an amendment to the bill by SBE and MML that would allow municipalities time to appear on the statewide ballot for the upcoming 2026 election. It would change the deadline for the municipalities to request to appear on the state ballot from 18 months before the election to 9 months before the election. Thank you, and I urge a favorable report on this bill.
I'm just here to help answer any technical questions on this. It's a very straightforward bill and very much supportive of it. The one thing is that it's not 9 months before the election. It's 9 months before the candidate filing deadline. So just that's the way it's written in the local government article. So yes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, committee members. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League in support of House Bill 322. This is something we've all worked on over the fall. We agree this is the solution to include the amendment. I want to stress briefly why this is emergency legislation in front of you. Municipalities have elections pretty much every month of the year. We've got one here in February, 4 in March, 11 in April, and 55 this upcoming May. So our municipalities are looking for certainty in these elections. We want to make sure that they're run smoothly, that people have the opportunity to vote. And so for those reasons, we ask for a quick favorable report on this legislation. Thank you.
Okay, questions. We will start with the Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill, Delegate. My question is for Mr. DeMarinis. I just wanted to make sure I understand. This is a very simple bill that looks like it just adds one sentence that basically authorizes a MOU with municipalities. Can you talk more about why legislation is necessary for you to enter into MOUs with our municipalities?
Sure. So I forgot to introduce Jared DeMarinis, State Administrator of Elections. So currently, the state board can only supply voter registration lists to a municipality. That is the only level of support that we can do. The counties, there is a law that allows them to say lease out the equipment, but since the equipment is actually owned by the state and bought by the state, the counties cannot lease out any of the equipment by the state. This was raised when we started to try to enter in MOUs with municipalities to defining our role with the state helping and assisting their elections outside of just providing voter registration lists. Notably, mostly in all mail elections, because we have the contract and we kind of run the list for them and work with the municipality and the vendor in order to facilitate those elections. Our Attorney General advised that we could not enter into any of these MOUs, at which point that's when we engaged with MML to tell them, of the legal issues that we're facing and the requirements and the restrictions that are currently in law. This is how we came up with this compromise here to kind of basically codify past practices and allow certainty amongst the municipalities, knowing what they're supposed to do, what the locals are supposed to do, and what the state board will provide as well, so that these agreements are, basically, outlining all our responsibilities. And then finally, when we were going through this, one of the cost-saving measures might be for municipalities is to join on to the state ballot. Other cities have in the past. With 18 months prior to the candidate filing deadline, that deadline is almost passed. So with that, I've worked with my team on that front there and said, we only really need a good 9 months notice beforehand to add and make any computer changes necessary without any fiscal impact on our systems. So that's kind of the historical background as to the impetus of this bill and why it's emergency as well.
Okay, Delegate Hornberger.
Madam Chair, definitely support this initiative. Just a technical question. Some of the municipalities in CECL, and I'm sure there's ones throughout the state, passed provisions that said if there is an uncontested election, they have the ability to suspend the election. And they're doing that mainly for cost reasons. There's cost associated with housing election, hiring vendors. So my question becomes, municipality elects to go on the ballot with you. The time passes, the filing deadline is over. They're now in a window of time where no one, so all of the seats are uncontested. Does the town still have the prerogative to withdraw from the election and not incur the cost? Because again, they're suspending these elections not because of the democratic process, but because they don't want to incur the cost.
So I think that there's two elements to that question there. I can answer the part when it comes onto my ballot. Once they come onto the state ballot, then they would follow mostly state rules. So just like there's uncontested elections now on a primary or anything like that, the same would occur. But the thing is, once you're on the state ballot, we're already mostly covering the cost. That's why municipalities would want to join onto it, because it's just adding an extra office onto it, not an additional expense for it, because they would be running the polling places, the early voting centers, that's all covered currently because we're putting on that show. If it's something that they're not coming onto the state ballot, then that's for them to MML to answer.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your question really was about if they're on the state ballot.
The bill.
I'd be happy to talk to you about your own local elections and their current processes if you'd like offline.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for bringing the bill. And I understand, I just want to make sure I understand the MOU. The part I'm a little unclear on is the joining on to the state ballot part. So I just want to be very clear, you would have some municipalities on a state ballot for a statewide election, or am I wrong?
They would just be on the state ballot for the municipality. So it would be like a district office. It would just, just like.
But you'd have all the state offices that are being run in that election cycle as well.
It would be the last of the offices on the state ballot.
So Board of Education and then.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, there are municipalities, some of them quite large, that allow for undocumented immigrants to have ballots to vote in their local races. So how would that affect this if they get a state ballot?
They could not join on because they would have to follow state laws and state procedures.
So that would be, so if they were trying to have an MOU with you, you would be very specific that they could not join on if that was their process or if they had elected to do that.
Right.
Thank you.
Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only question I have, like right now, the town of Ocean City administers the election the same day, but in a separate room, and they do it for the timeliness of the returns. So they know, instantly once the votes are counted. Will there be a difference in the timeliness since it's probably only one polling station in most, I would think in most cases for a municipality? Would there be a quicker turnaround time because of only the one polling place, or
It would be the same procedures. Like if you're coming onto the state ballot, you're coming onto our mechanisms, and you're just like every other office. It would be a part of the normal process. If that's for the municipality then to weigh and balance, and to if they want to keep their own elections, that's their option. But if they want to join on to ours, they follow our processes. From basically the deadlines, the voting days, the eligibility requirements for voter registration, and locations. So if they want to change the location, no, they would have to do their own, and that's their option. We're not forcing them to join on there, and that's separate from the MOU because the MOU can be done for a 25 election now or any year. Subsequent to see for our level of support.
So you typically post the results on the door or whatever at the end of, once all the votes are tallied, correct? For that particular polling place. How long does that usually take for a particular polling place from when the polls close to when that paper would be posted on the door? What's a good average?
I mean, it depends on everything that goes on there, but I mean, they usually do it right before, when the last voter is counted, then they start the process. Usually it takes about a half hour to 45 minutes to start closing down a polling place, maybe to print out the tape and to post it up on the wall there at that point there. But it also depends on when the last voter is was in line at 8 o'clock that day.
Okay, so 45 minutes after the last voter is not unreasonable.
For the tape.
Right, correct. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 322. We're going to jump back. Now I see a lot of my colleagues are here. We're going to jump back to our order. House Bill 426, Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I know this is sponsor only. I want to thank you all for passing this bill last year. It passed with 10 negative votes on the floor, but no one on this committee voted against it on the House floor. So thank you all again. I won't go into all the details on risk limiting audits. You have the written testimony. I also provided 2 pages in my testimony from verified voting that gives some more information. I'd also like to thank, in addition to Madam Chair today, I want to thank the Vice Chair, who's my one co-sponsor on this bill. Good to have the Election Law Subcommittee Chair on the bill. I first introduced this bill in 2020. I've been introducing it since. We've passed it in this committee multiple times. And risk limiting audits are just a different way to audit. It's a statistical procedure. It's using math to say, when do we think an election is really close? How many ballots should we be looking at? Just to say that the current process for the state basically looks at the ballot and then looks at the picture of the ballot. And when you do that, you're not really auditing. You're just like comparing 2 different pictures. So the current process is not considered a real audit. The risk limiting audit is considered the gold standard. So I'm certainly glad to answer questions. I do want to address a few things. I did hear from one election expert that maybe not risk limiting audits, but potentially in the future there'll be other statistical methods that may be better. So leaving it open that way to another method in the future. I do want to mention that back in December, there was a risk limiting audit pilot done in Harford County. And I think a good report from there, from the state board and from others, I think your staff as well, that was there. And so people saw how easy it could be done. The state of Rhode Island has done this, and it proves to be a lot faster than people think. I think there were concerns offered by the local election officials, and I think obviously they have to be looked at. And I do believe that one of the groups, Verified Voting, is suggesting that maybe we limit the number of races we do this for. But again, I look forward to having further conversations with anyone who has any questions. So I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for going back to the order. Sorry I wasn't here a few minutes prior. And I urge a favorable report on House Bill 426.
None of your colleagues that are about to come behind you were here either, so it's fine. Any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 426. Delegate Chisholm, House Bill 447.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sorry. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of Ways and Means, it's always great to be back here. Unfortunately, this will be very brief. This is just a local cleanup bill. For the record, I'm Delegate Brian Chisholm here to present HB 447. It just simply changes the name of Habitat for Humanity to Habitat for Humanity of the Chesapeake Incorporated so that they can maintain their tax exempt status in Anne Arundel County. With that, I ask for a favorable rule.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 447. Delegate Charkoudian, welcome back. House Bill 296.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two witnesses.
Come on up.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues, I was going to say I have a simple bill, but then the one that just went in front of me kind of makes this look a little more complicated. So, for the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian asking for a favorable report on House Bill 296. Essentially, this addresses the personal property tax section. 2 years ago, Department of Assessment and Taxation raised the threshold for exemption for personal property tax from $2,500 to $20,000 or less. And this bill doesn't change that threshold, but at the same time that they made that change, they actually removed the part of statute that allowed essentially for an audit, not an audit, but a review to occur. And so there's a section of statute that says if a person attests to owning a sum of a total personal property tax less than $20,000, the department may not collect personal property tax information from the person or require the person to submit a personal property tax return. And so essentially what it allows everyone to do is to say that they have personal property tax less than $20,000 and not submit any documentation or keep any documentation to verify that. And so SDAT hasn't been able to pursue when they see major changes in reporting. Normally they would pursue and look for verified information, and the way that this was written when that change was made, they're not able to do that verification. So what the bill does is it leaves the threshold at $20,000, but it removes the section of law that prevented the ability of the department to do the verification, and they can speak more to the details of that.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dan Phillips. I'm the Director of the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation. I have with me today our Associate Director, Maria Mathias. House Bill 296 will allow the Department of Assessments and Taxation to request additional documentation for entities that report less than $20,000 in business personal property. Business personal property is property owned by a business that is not land or structure. The state of Maryland requires businesses to report the amount they own in business personal property annually, even those that have none. Counties collect tax revenue based on these reports. In 2022, the department sponsored a bill that raised the threshold for businesses not to report business personal property from $2,500 to $20,000 or less. In that bill, language was included that prohibited the department from being able to request any and all documentation to back up the self-reported assessment. The Business Personal Property Division audits any business that reports a drop in business personal property of 40% or more from one year to the next, unless the business simply says they have less than 20,000, in which case we're prohibited from even questioning it. This audit process is to verify that there are no errors in the self-reported assessment and to ensure that counties continue to collect revenues on the full amount of business personal property owned by businesses within the jurisdiction. If passed, this bill will allow the department to equitably assess business personal property reports, as has been the standard procedure for years. I'd like to thank the delegate for sponsoring this bill and we request a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here in support of the bill. You've heard the rationale for the bill and why it's necessary. I'll just say that my understanding is that we have some taxpayers who are claiming that they have less than 20,000 when the year before they had an astronomical amount of personal property. When that happens, SSTAT systems automatically trigger those returns and say, hey, there's a problem, the red light's going off, but there's nothing SSTAT can do under current law because of the bill that passed a few years ago. So we think this bill promotes transparency and good taxpayer behavior. It promotes fairness, and we'd ask for an unfavorable report. Again, keeping the exemption, but just making sure that SSTAT has the ability to check promotes fairness for everyone.
Okay, are there any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 296. Delegate Williams, you want to do House Bill 416 first?
Yeah, whatever the committee would like.
Okay, yep.
Okay. All right. So, good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and the members of the esteemed Ways and Means Committee. I am Delegate Williams here to talk about House Bill 416, which is a Prince George's County delegation bill with regards to a tax on vacant properties. This bill is really piggybacking off of legislation that the General Assembly passed last year. I believe it was House Bill number 2, which allowed local jurisdictions to assess a separate or special tax on vacant properties and their respective jurisdictions. It was enabling legislation that was passed out of the House as well as the Senate and became state law. However, Prince George's County felt the need to submit additional legislation just to clarify that this is a measure that our county could use. We have various taxing provisions in Prince George's County, one most notably known as TRIM, that caps the amount that we can tax our residential properties in Prince George's County. And so our county executive and county council had received guidance from their Office of Law that if we were to have implemented the special tax based on the legislation that was passed last year, that we may be running afoul of TRIM, which is our county law with regards to the taxing of residential properties. And so we have, were requested by our county council to submit the bill that is before you, just to clarify that the enactment of House Bill 2 from last session would not violate TRIM for us on a county level. And so that was the reason that the bill was brought forth. The delegation has not taken up the bill yet. It is still pending in our delegation, and I don't think we've received formal letters yet from our county council and our county executive, but I've been told that those formal positions with regards to the legislation will be forthcoming as well.
Okay, any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 416. Delegate Williams, House Bill 317. And can we have Joanne Antoine, Ms. Griffin, and Monica Wiley please come forward?
Yes. Okay, Ms. Antoine texted me earlier, Madam Chair, she's a bit under the weather.
Okay.
I think she was trying to send someone else from her office. Morgan, I don't know if Morgan is here or not, but she lost her voice, and so that's why she's not here this
Okay.
afternoon.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, and the members of the esteemed Ways and Means Committee. I'm Delegate Nicole Williams testifying in favor of House Bill 317, also known as the Curbside Voting Pilot Program. We have heard this bill in various iterations in the past, and I do want to thank this body for passing this bill last session out of this committee and actually out of the House. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it across the finish line, across the street, but we have received some feedback over the interim, which has resulted in the bill that is before you today. This bill is now a pilot program which will examine how curbside voting can take place here in Maryland by establishing the program in 3 locations across the state, 1 small, medium, and large jurisdiction during both the primary and general election. These designated areas must be determined at least 6 months in advance by the State Board of Election and with their approval, and this would expand voting access to individuals with mobility limitations who still wish to vote in person. Curbside voting currently exists in 27 bipartisan states, as well as the District of Columbia. In each election cycle, individuals here in Maryland are forced to overcome physical hardships in order to exercise their vote. While we do have vote by mail, you do have to request your mail-in ballot. And so if you fail to meet the deadline to request your mail-in ballot, you are going to have to physically go either during early vote or on election day. And others may just prefer not to do mail-in ballots, and they would prefer to just physically go in person. And so this is one of the reasons for bringing forth this bill. During this past election cycle, I actually witnessed firsthand at a polling place in my own district, a resident wanted to vote on election day. She had a cane, and she got to the polling place. She saw me outside, was like, "Hey, Delegate Williams, how long is the line inside the high school?" I was like, "It's about an hour and a half wait, actually." And she's like, "Oh my God, I can't stand for an hour and a half just so I can vote. But it's election day. Like, this is your day. This is the only opportunity she had to vote." And luckily, she had her daughter with her who was able to stand in line on her behalf while she sat inside and waited for her opportunity to cast her vote this past November. And it is for those constituents that I bring forth this bill. It would be effective for individuals who are physically, like I said, unable to stand for long periods of time, and allows them to vote comfortably without unnecessary stressors. It could assist individuals with all types of mobility issues. And like I said, other states are able to do this safely and securely. And I believe all citizens have the right to vote in the manner in which they are able to do so in a safe manner. And for those reasons, I am urging this committee to give a favorable report to House Bill 317.
I will. Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Charles-Setta Griffin, and I serve as chair of the Legislative Committee for AARP Suitland, Maryland, Chapter number 939. In this role, I work closely with Tammy Bresnahan, Director of Advocacy for AARP Maryland. On behalf of AARP Maryland and its local chapters, I'm here to express our strong support for HB 317, Election Law Curbside Voting Pilot Program. We extend our thanks to Delegate Williams and Wilkins for sponsoring this critical piece of legislation. AARP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that fights for the issues that matter most to its members and all older Americans. One of our priorities is ensuring access to the ballot box for all eligible voters. AARP encourages states to provide a wide range of voting options to make it easier for citizens to exercise their fundamental right to vote. Maryland has made significant progress in expanding voter access by implementing early voting, offering vote-by-mail options, and providing convenient ballot drop-off locations. These measures have rightfully earned the state high marks. However, Maryland lags behind in one crucial area, curbside voting. HB 317 addresses this gap by proposing a curbside voting pilot program, which would allow any voter to request this option while maintaining the integrity of the electoral process. Curbside voting is especially important for Marylanders with disabilities and frail older adults who face physical barriers to entering polling locations. Many seniors prefer to vote in person on Election Day and would greatly benefit from this accommodation. Curbside voting is not a novel concept. Many states and jurisdictions, including our neighbors in Virginia and DC, have successfully implemented similar programs. HB 317 represents Maryland's opportunity to join these states in ensuring equitable access to the polls for all its citizens. On behalf of AARP Maryland and Chapter 939, I thank the Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to testify in support of HB 317. We respectfully urge the committee to issue a favorable report. And if you have any questions, you may contact Tammy Breshnahan or myself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I will try to stay within the 2 minutes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I am Monica Wiley, and I am a constituent in the state of Maryland. I come before you vehemently and respectfully asking for a favorable report of this bill. This bill is very important to me because I brought this to Delegate Nicole Williams multiple times. I have testified before you and previous legislative sessions requesting that you all support this bill. The reason why this bill is important to me is because I am one of the architects that's responsible for curbside voting bill in Virginia. And now I am constituent of Maryland. I have been here for a decade. And it is unacceptable that I have to experience undue hardship and stress on my body to be able to vote, especially in the recent election cycle for the presidential election of 2024. As a person that works on voting for the National Disability Rights Network, it is our responsibility to make sure that everyone has access to the voter ballot. You already have my written report in front of you. I am a person with a physical disability. It was caused by a drunk driver that killed my entire family at the age of 9. I should not have to be relegated, nor does my community should be relegated to just voting by mail or any other measures. We have worked hard to be a part of the community, and we should be able to vote along with our community peers on the day of voting. I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors and those that came before me that fought hard for voting rights. And so voting rights is disability rights. Disability rights are voting rights, and we should have full access to the voter ballot without having to worry about undue hardship to our body or even missing the opportunity to vote by mail. I'm a person, and several members of my community prefer to vote in person, and so I respectfully ask for you to submit a favorable report of this bill, and I thank you for your attention today.
Thank you for coming today. And I do remember you from previous years, so thank you. Unfortunately, sometimes good pieces of legislation, I know, take multiple years. So we need to, make sure the Senate sees what we see in this legislation. But we appreciate you, both of you, coming down to testify, but I absolutely remember you being here in previous years. So thank you for coming again. We do have questions. Delegate Buckle.
Madam Chair, Delegate Williams or someone else may be able to answer better. Is the bill only for individuals? I have a tremendous amount of compassion, I think everyone here does, for people from the disabled community that want to, whether they be visually impaired, physically impaired, whatever it is, we need to treat them fully as members of society, fully. Is the bill's curbside voting provisions limited only to that group of people, or could someone who's even as good a shape, say, as Delegate Hornberger, could he just decide that, he is the picture of health and that he just wants to vote from his car curbside. So it's not a bill that's really limited or directed towards those that have disabilities. It's anybody.
It's not limited. It's open to anyone because we didn't want to discriminate, based on any factor, to be quite honest with you. So in theory, it is open to anyone, whether you're pregnant and have a difficulty standing in line to vote, to whether you do have a physical disability or you're in the best shape of your life, like Delegate Hornberger.
That's a sad commentary upon his shape, but I appreciate that. So, and then I appreciate that clarification, and that, might be part of something to discuss, how to really get this for the people who really, really need it, as opposed to just somebody who may decide, I just want to do it. But then the other question was, the Maryland Association of Election Officials seem to suggest that the equipment that they have, the equipment that we provide them as state and sometimes shares from local government, may not in fact work for outdoor mobile use. Now I don't know much about technology, as you may know from getting to know me, but that is an issue of if they say, hey, our machines, maybe in Virginia they have different machines, but I'd say better machines perhaps that work. But if our machines, they're like, yeah, we can't physically wheel these out and set them up curbside in these locations, or they're not capable, high heat, rain, whatever it is that something that the bill addresses, or is there a way that we can work through that?
Yeah, so we've had a number of conversations with them over the interim on this specific issue. And actually, I have a few amendments as well that are pending in the amendment office to address any concerns as it relates to the security of voting in this fashion. But to address your point, so the State Board of Elections actually has a procurement pending. They have an RFP out and a procurement pending for new equipment. And with the RFP, the equipment that they're seeking will be lighter and easier in order to effectuate curbside voting. So the equipment does exist. It's just that that's not the equipment that we physically have here in Maryland. And so the State Board of Elections is currently undergoing that process. They're hoping that they will have the new equipment in place by the 2028 election, is what I've been told by the State Board of Elections. So that's also part of why you see this pilot program going to 2029, is that so we can see what the use of the current equipment is, as well as the use of the new equipment that they will be obtaining for that 2028 election.
Okay, and that makes sense. We want to do, if we do it, we want to do it in some place that has the right equipment. It would be terrible for people to pull up and be like, hey, the machine doesn't work. You're going to have to now go park your car and get out anyway. We don't
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for your consideration. I appreciate it.
Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, delegates, for bringing this to our attention and for the testimony. I have a question because I noted during the election in my county, there were several persons who were disabled or needed some assistance. When you say curbside, does it also consider that there might be expedited options if they were to go inside as well? Or is this only outside?
This would only be outside. The options that are currently in place, if you want to physically go inside but still need an accommodation, will continue to be available for those individuals. But this would just be solely if you are unable or not able to easily get out of your vehicle. This is an option that you could exercise.
Well, the reason I ask that is because in my county, if you, for example, were on crutches or whatever, the election judge said to the person, to the voter, have someone be a placeholder, and when they get inside, then you come forward. I thought that was really a disadvantage because they still had to wait for an hour or so.
Yes. Versus
if they were able to expedite them at the time when they were able to get inside. So I would really, if you consider adding that in somehow, or if that would weaken your bill and maybe bring it back next year. But I certainly appreciate the testimony that I've heard from the members who are here today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate Patterson. I'm not opposed to an amendment that would do such a thing. I mean, at this point, the bill is now the work of the committee. And so if that is something that the committee sees fit, we are happy to support.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you all for being here, and that concludes the hearing on House Bill 317.
Thank you.
Delegate Stewart, House Bill 330, and we have with us.
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
think, are you? in
Oh, I'm
position?
sorry, yes,
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Lang, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, one second, Delegate Stewart. So back to House Bill 317. I apologize, Mr. Lang.
I apologize, my scooter's gonna make some noise, so just bear with me for a second.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Alan Lang from Harwood, Maryland. I was wondering if the committee is aware of the other, I wish I'd brought the paper, but there's a bill to help the elderly and the disabled to vote in person rather than use curbside. It's coming up in the next couple of days. I just wonder if that might be a simpler solution than to go through all this where people, I know the Mayo put out testimony last year about the logistics of it, the technology problems, election security and ballot integrity problems, and weather considerations. I understand the issue. I broke my foot right after the election, and I also currently have a very sore back. I wouldn't be able to stand in line if those things had occurred back in early November. But if I understand the other bill, that I would be having these problems, would be allowed to go in and sit until my turn came up in line and then vote. I'm not so sure why the question about curbside voting, if there's a long line, whether you could just vote quickly where everyone else would have to stand in line. I think that a better alternative is being able to move in, and then when it's your turn to check in, you're able to check in. And then when it's your turn to go to the polling spot and fill out your vote, and that it would offset the costs and all the other logistical issues with this bill. So because of that, I would like to urge an unfavorable decision on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Lang? Okay, thank you, Mr. Lang. Now that does conclude the hearing on House Bill 317. Delegate Stewart, 330. Who would you like to come up with you? I have Matthew Girardi in favor, Dan Reed, Kevin Canale favorable with amendment, and Justin Fiore favorable with.
They can all come if they can make it up.
Come on
They're all
down.
welcome. Our favorable with amendment folks are all friends too, so
Okay.
we're all on the same page. Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, illustrious and honorable members of both the Ways and Means Committee and the Environment and Transportation Committee.
Yes, thank you for reminding me that we have with us Delegates Long, Delegates Siliberti, and Delegates Lehman from E&T joining us. And if you have questions, please just find an empty seat and let me know. Thank you.
So honorable members of both committees, plus Delegate Siliberti. This is House Bill 330. I'm Delegate Vaughn Stewart. So in the 1970s, Pennsylvania, our neighbor to the north, was in deep trouble. The steel industry had collapsed, and towns across the state were really facing the repercussions. They had massive population loss, their tax base had plummeted, their crime rates jumped, and businesses were fleeing the state, all across the state. The situation was so dire that the state actually was threatening to take over various cities under their own control. In 1982, the leaders of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the state capital, were facing a takeover. Within a year, they were going to be taken over by the state under their control. And to avoid that fate, they really tried a Hail Mary option. They implemented what's called a split rate tax system. That's a clunky name for a pretty simple idea. What Harrisburg did is they split their property tax system into two parts, a tax on land and a tax on buildings. And their idea was that, well, maybe this will boost development, right? Maybe if we tax land a little bit higher than we tax buildings, then people will be incentivized to build buildings because their property rates will go down. And maybe that's a way that we can save the city, we can stem vacancy, we can stem blight, and maybe we can keep our own city control of the city instead of the state having to take it over. So they thought it could work. they did not expect for it to basically result in a complete economic turnaround of the city. So in 1982, the city of Harrisburg was ranked as the second most distressed city in the entire country. But within the next 12 years, they had more than $1 billion of new investment after implementing the split rate tax system. The number of vacant structures went from 4,200 in 1982 to fewer than 500 in 2001. And the downtown, which was basically a ghost town in the 70s and 80s, came alive. It's still alive if you want to make the drive up there. I went and visited last year. The number of the businesses on the city tax roll has gone from 1,900 businesses in 1982 to now almost 9,000 just a few decades later. In 1994, after seeing the success, a young whippersnapper, up-and-coming Pennsylvania Republican named Pat Toomey joined the Allentown, Pennsylvania's Government Study Commission. And Pat Toomey had a big idea of himself. Let's copy the city of Harrisburg and just do that here in Allentown, which was facing a lot of the same problems. As a result, Pat Toomey was able to deliver property tax cuts for 70% of the town's residents. He boasted, he said, for the remaining 30% that had to pay a little bit more, he said, many of them now have newer or better buildings on them. He said this a few years later, stabilizing the tax base to the point where we haven't had a tax increase in many years. Pat Toomey actually ended up writing the success of this idea that he stole from Harrisburg all the way to the U.S. Senate. And in some neighborhoods in Harrisburg, by the way, some of the areas where they had like pre-war housing, some of the poorer pockets of Harrisburg, more than 90% of residents actually got a tax cut. So what does HB 330 do? It essentially allows counties in Maryland to do what Harrisburg and Allentown did. Tax land and buildings at different rates, but only within a mile of rail stations. This is not a radical idea. Not only have a number of Pennsylvania towns adopted this, but localities in Virginia near their WMATA stations already have this ability. So this is actually one situation where I would advise you not to read the bill. It's pretty clunky, and it's my fault. It's not DLS's fault. I've cleaned up the language. I have a sponsor amendment. I have it drafted. I'll email it to everyone. It's a lot clearer, but essentially it just says that counties near rail stations can adopt a split rate taxation system and tax land and buildings at different rates. Now, they don't have to do exactly what Allentown and Harrisburg did. They did basically a 5-to-1 ratio, 5 times more land value tax than building tax. Now, counties could reverse it if they didn't want any new housing or new development near rail. I personally wouldn't do that, but under the bill they could. If they wanted to block new housing, they could set the rates at whatever they want to. Now, the one cool thing, I think it's cool, in the bill is we're going to ask the counties that they do this to send some of the money back to the Transportation Trust Fund. Just 5% per a sponsor amendment. We initially had it at 50%, and I had a conversation with Mako that seemed very high, and it may actually discourage counties from doing this in the first place. So we went from 50 to 5%, and the justification for that is that state investments in the rail station are part of why the land value near rail stations is so high in the first place. So we think it's only fair and reasonable for the counties to give us some of that revenue back for the TTF. So with the sponsor amendment, AOBA is no longer in opposition. They withdrew their opposition this morning after I showed them their amendments. Mako is, as I think they'll tell you, is supportive of the sponsor amendments. And so I'm hoping that we'll get to this bill to the point where there will not be any opposition to it, and we can join Pennsylvania and Virginia as being beneficiaries of this. And I would really say this bill is a win-win, win-win. That's 4 wins, ladies and gentlemen. It's a win for, that's right, a win for county autonomy and county budgets, that's number 1. A win for homeowners, because if Allentown is any indication, 70% of homeowners in our counties could see their property tax cut. It's a win for the housing crisis, because this bill will boost housing development and housing construction near Metro, where we need it the most. And finally, the 4th win is it's a win for our transportation system, because if we build more houses near our rail stations, we'll have more transit riders, which is good for fare box recovery, and more money into the TTF means that more potholes will be filled, we'll have more reliable transit, more projects will be greenlit, and fewer people will die on Maryland's roads. So with that, a quad win for you. I appreciate your time, and I urge a favorable report.
Let's see here. There we go.
Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Wilkins, happy Transit Equity Day. My name is Matthew Girardi. I serve as Political and Communications Director for ATU Local 689. Local 689 supports HB 330 and urges a favorable report. This bill would be an invaluable reform for land use, transportation, taxation that would benefit working class Marylanders and help usher in more livable and accessible communities. I'll start by saying that Local 689 members are working class people who make our living running this region's transit systems. We are frontline workers to the frontline workers. Unfortunately, the crisis of housing affordability and the lack of accessible communities hits us particularly hard. The cruel irony is magnified by the fact that the systems we power too often only operate in areas that are out of reach for us and our families. In short, we don't have enough transit-accessible communities, and housing in the few communities we do have is so scarce that it is unaffordable to working-class people. Something needs to give. Land value taxation, also known as split roll, as Delegate Stewart said, is a solution we see both to solve the funding shortfall while also still incentivizing transit-oriented development. Under LVR or LVT, multifamily housing, mixed-use development, and other maximized use for plots of land are advantaged. Thus, if applied to areas surrounding transit, the approach could yield really transformative results. In other words, we could have a way both to fund transit and also not to penalize housing production in the process. Additionally, as stated in my written testimony, a fundamental fairness principle is at play here, right? Land around transit stations is made more valuable by them, and at their core, rapid transit is a public investment. Allowing its returns to land to be entirely kept as a windfall benefit to private entities doesn't really make sense. So all jurisdictions, including counties and Baltimore City, should have the ability to enact such a measure if they so choose. HB 330 does exactly that, and as such, we could not be more excited about it. Local 689 thanks Delegate Stewart for leading this worthy measure and highly encourages this committee to issue a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Do you have someone else who's favorable? You want to go?
Sure. Hi, my name is Dan Reed. I'm a Maryland Policy Director at Greater Washington. We're a nonprofit that works on better land use and housing and transportation issues in Greater DC area and beyond. We strongly support House Bill 330. We think this is a common sense change to our property tax structure that will help revitalize neighborhoods and generate revenue at a time when the state is facing a $3 billion budget shortfall. I can't say it enough. Maryland has a housing shortage. We are short as many as 150,000 homes, which has resulted in rising home prices, forced families to move far from jobs and loved ones, and caused many people to leave the state entirely. We did a poll last spring that said that 72% of Maryland voters want the state government to do something about high housing costs, and 60% support home builders, making it easier for home builders to build more homes at transit stations. And one solution to help make this happen is to change the way we collect property taxes around our valuable land at our 100 and counting rail transit stations. As has been explained, we currently charge the same rate for land as we do with improvements on the land, which means there's a huge incentive to leave land vacant. And we can see that all over the state, right? You've probably gotten off a train, whether on the metro in Prince George's County or in Baltimore City or wherever. When you get off the train, there's just open field or vacant lots or parking lots or what have you. This bill would help ameliorate that. It means tax rates on vacant land would go up, creating parity with tax-paying homeowners and encouraging landowners to put that property to use. This is not a new idea. If I want to look up Henry George, the progenitor of this idea in Delaware, you'll learn more than you ever wanted to hear about it. But it's a time, one whose time has come in Maryland. So we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Justin Fiore here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League in support of House Bill 330 with amendments. We think this is a really interesting concept, and I applaud the delegate for bringing it. Just to have a more nuanced discussion of matters of policy. With regard to our amendments surrounding the sharing of revenue, I think in addition to the concerning precedent that this sets of diverting local property tax to the state, it also puts local officials in an awkward position of potentially voting for state tax increase. So for those reasons, we'd like to amend the sponsor's amendment essentially to just say local revenues stay with the local government, and if the state would like to use the state property tax authority it has for something similar, we think that makes a lot of sense as well.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of the bill as amended by the sponsor. Very much appreciate the sponsor's conversations. Again, this is another tool in the toolbox. We've been in here a lot this session talking about local revenue flexibility. This allows us to kind of shift the burden to the people who maybe would benefit the most from these improvements and from the land. So we think it's a good idea. We think that it could also alleviate pressure on lower income folks. And again, this would enable the county to do that and kind of shift that burden. And also it creates another tool for counties to raise revenue, particularly to build around rail stations. And hopefully we can incentivize more affordable housing too. So quad win, as the good sponsor said, and we'd ask for a favorable report as amended.
Okay, questions, Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my friend from Montgomery County, there's a lot of amendments. I'm sure I'm missing something in the blizzard of amendments, but you said at one point in time, AOBA has indicated to you that they will withdraw their written opposition to it. To what you're understanding, what is that based on? What's the policy change that changed that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think honestly it's based on me drafting the bill poorly. They just honestly, I mean, I don't want to speak for AOBA, but I had a good conversation with Brian Anlew this morning. Okay. I think they honestly just genuinely didn't understand what I was getting at with the bill, because there was like real like concerning words in there around like penalties and tax penalties, and they thought this was going to increase essentially the cost to do business for either large rental buildings or, as NAOP is concerned, large commercial buildings near transit. And that's just my bad because I drafted it bad. And I kind of made the calculation of like, would I put it in knowing that it's kind of sloppy and weirdly drafted and then amend it? Or do I wait and then get a later bill date, right? So I kind of had to make this calculation. And I think I chose probably poorly, to be honest, because I think that it's so confusing. I've had more people call me about the text of this bill, like confused, like what the hell is this Delegate Stewart, than I probably had all my other bills combined. And so AOBA, my fault, not their fault. What? And that's a lot of bills. I put in like 80 bills every year, as you guys know. So
you are
like,
prolific.
Yeah. So I think it's AOBA. It's AOBA's. It's not their fault. I think they were they stumbled over it. And once I explained to them that not only what the bill actually does, but also that their equivalent organization in Northern Virginia, and also NAOP's equivalent organizations in Northern Virginia and Pennsylvania, have always been some of the biggest, not only beneficiaries, but proponents of this kind of idea. And that once I pointed that out to them, they relented. Plus, as you know, Delegate Buckle, better than most people, I can be very charming.
You can be very, very charming. I'm not sure about the quad win thing. I think you just talk a lot and talk really fast.
You like the quad win. You like
we learned that in law school. You talk a lot. So yeah, because I reading the fiscal note, the fiscal note seems to suggest that local property tax revenues likely would decrease, meaning that people would be paying less in local property taxes under the bill.
Well, how it's worked in Pennsylvania is that most people pay less, but that you can draft this in whatever way you want. So if a locality, generally what they want to do is it to be relatively tax revenue neutral. Yeah, is normally what they do. Now, if they need to bolster their revenue rolls for whatever reason, they have a shortfall, maybe it's a little bit of a boost, or maybe if they have a surplus, which no one really does these days, they could go down, right? But generally, it's revenue neutral, and generally, as we saw in Allentown with Pat Toomey's, brilliant
I'm really
copy
sad
cabinet.
you didn't quote any of the song lyrics while you
Yeah, exactly. So they delivered property tax relief for 70% of property owners in Allentown, and of the community that was most squeezed by housing costs and sort of this pre-war like factory homes, like company town kind of housing that they used to have there, or they still have some.
They still have.
It was like 94% of those folks got a property tax cut after they passed that in 1994.
Does this apply to Amtrak state, property near Amtrak?
Amtrak is a rail station, yes.
Okay.
So, but again, it's enabling. So I know that you've got some Amtrak stations up by you.
The note says there are 111 rail stations located in the state, but they don't say anything about Amtrak. They talk about MARC, Baltimore Metro, Baltimore Light Rail, and the Metro Rail in Montgomery Prince George's. I just wanted to clarify.
Oh, well, maybe it's not. Maybe
Amtrak stations exist in Hagerstown, Frederick, Cumberland.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have an amendment to be more inclusive, I'd be down for that. I mean, obviously, none of the Western Maryland counties need to do this. If they think this is a wacky idea from a wacky delegate, I won't take any offense.
I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth.
But if they think if they think it's a quad win, like so many people in this room there seems to be building momentum here for the quad win motif in particular.
I can feel the excitement from the front panel.
I know. Well, then if seriously, they want to be written in and they want Amtrak to make sure it's included so that some of these Western Maryland counties can at least have the option. We don't want to force them to, but this is an option, that they may want to take to provide some property tax relief for their residents. So if that's an amendment that y'all want to pursue, I'm not going to stand in your way. It's your property now.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we have a question by Delegate Lehman, who is in Delegate Feldmark's seat.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Stewart. This is a great bill. I appreciate the presentation. So one quick clarification on the systems it applies to. Baltimore Subway, Baltimore's light rail, MARC stations, including Camden, Penn, and Brunswick, and also WMATA stations. You say Metro Rail, but WMATA, all of
It's WMATA. It's WMATA. We also, as part of the sponsor amendment, we added the Purple Line
Right.
stops in as well. We have
Yeah.
not added Amtrak yet, but it sounds like there's a Buckle Amtrak amendment forthcoming.
Okay, and so my question is, in glancing over the bill, my understanding is that Baltimore City and the counties could set this special tax rate, but then when you get down to the penalty section, my reading is that in addition to Baltimore City and the counties, it looks like other municipalities can pass laws pass laws addressing and imposing penalties. So in my district, for example, the city of Laurel, we have a MARC station. Am I reading this correctly, that the city of Laurel could separately enact a law to impose a penalty? Is that what you mean to say?
Well, first, I would caution you again against reading the bill because it is going to be fixed with the sponsor amendment. But secondly, cities can actually already do this, is my understanding, to a large degree. So I think Maryland municipalities can already do this. The only city actually in the state that cannot do this already is Baltimore City. So Baltimore City and the counties cannot do this. Cities already have this ability. So if Laurel or any of the number of like 3,000 municipalities that are in Prince George's County, if they wanted to do this right now, they actually could. It's just Prince George's couldn't create a holistic approach for the whole county or for the non-municipal land.
So that's what I was going to ask. Laurel could do that on the penalty part, but then they would be doing that in lieu of a Prince George's County penalty. There couldn't be two separate
That's right.
penalties.
They couldn't be double penalized. That's correct.
And just one last point, or kind of a question of point for consistency's sake. It just did look like a reading, and you might want to correct that. In the beginning, it's clear that it's Baltimore City and the counties that are allowed to establish the rate, all the way through to the last provision on the penalties, which seems to add all other municipalities.
Yes, I will show you the sponsor amendments, and it'll clear things up.
But yeah, generally speaking, municipalities already have broad discretion to create different subclasses, so that didn't need to be added in the first section. The first section makes clear counties will also have that authority for this specific purpose.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for bringing this bill. I'm very intrigued. My question has to do with the fact, with kind of along with what Delegate Lehman was asking about, with respect to the only one can impose a penalty. How is it decided which entity is going to impose the penalty?
If you're talking about a municipality, let's say in Prince George's County, the city gets the first crack at it. So, I mean, the city would be the responsible for doing that. So even if this bill fails, which we know it won't, but even if it fails, then any municipalities in your district could turn around tomorrow and start tinkering with this idea because they already have the ability to create different subclasses of property taxes. Unfortunately, most municipalities in the country, I think, haven't even heard of this idea. They haven't seen the story of Allentown and Harrisburg and seen what Virginia has been able to do, so they don't know to do this. But hopefully by even putting the bill in, we can raise some awareness for municipalities about some other tools they already have in their toolbox. But that's the answer to your question. The cities, if it's a municipality, the cities would do it. This would allow the county land around those cities in Prince George's, which I know is more limited than a lot of other counties that, like in my district where there's not a whole lot of incorporated cities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 330. House Bill 341, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth, and I'm here presenting House Bill 341. I've been working on this issue for a couple of years, and in that time, I have seen abandoned gas stations in every community I've been in around the state. They seem to be everywhere from urban to rural areas. I've seen properties, and often these gas stations stay abandoned for many years, sometimes 10 years or more, because they have underground storage tanks and they have some environmental contamination. So in order to convert them to some other beneficial land use, the underground storage tanks have to be removed, and that environmental remediation needs to be done. And so I've seen properties in Baltimore City that have been abandoned for many years and spoken to developers that would like to develop that, but because of the cost, they're unable to do that. I've seen right here in Annapolis, there's a couple properties, and I just spoke to an Annapolis alderman today about one property on Forest Drive and Tyler Avenue that they would like to see developed into mixed use, where there was formerly a gas station. The Rural Maryland Council submitted testimony where they talk about they supported the bill, and they talk about abandoned gas stations in rural areas. So not only are these properties abandoned, they're also harming the potential for economic revitalization in those areas, because beyond the property itself, if you're looking at developing areas around that, do you really want to develop right next to this eyesore that's been sitting there abandoned for 10 years? So this is a very simple bill. It authorizes counties and municipalities to enact a property tax credit to assist with the remediation and removal of the underground storage tanks, to really encourage those properties to be redeveloped so that that property itself can be a benefit, and that it can encourage economic revitalization for the surrounding communities. So that's basically it. MACO does support this bill, and I ask for a favorable report and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions? Seeing none, okay, thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 341. Delegate Ruth, House Bill 342.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Vice Chair, safe to say this one's a little more controversial than the other one. This is, for the record, I'm Delegate Sheila Ruth, presenting House Bill 342. And what this would do is, so when real estate transactions occur, as everybody on this committee knows, there's a transfer tax that is applied to that. And the proceeds from that transfer tax, a large portion of that go to land preservation programs. What this bill does is it would create progressive structures for that transfer tax, so that based on the value of the property, the percentage goes up. So instead of a flat 0.5% of transfer tax for every property, it starts at 0.25% and would go up from there. And you know, I think that some of the testimony talks about, some of the opposition testimony talks about raising the cost of houses, but the reality is that for many people, purchasing a house would be less expensive with this. And I looked at, and in my testimony, you'll see a table of the median house per county, which I got from the Maryland Realtors website. And in, I think it's 9 counties, the median home price would actually pay less in transfer tax. So again, median being half of the houses. So at least half of the houses would pay less in transfer tax. Another 8 or 9 would pay the same. And only in 3 counties would the median home pay more transfer tax. And in those cases, those 3 counties, the additional transfer tax would be, because of the traditional split between buyer and seller, would be, the buyer's share would be $675 to $769 additional dollars. So by doing this, it also has the potential to generate significant additional revenue. And the fiscal note says that general fund revenues would, so what the bill also does is it takes some of that additional revenue and transfers it to the general fund to help with our funding our state services. Now, last year when I had this bill, I did get a lot of feedback from the land preservation organizations to make sure that we don't harm those. And my intent was never to harm those. Project Open Space, the rural preservation, all of those programs are really important to me. So my intent was never to hurt them. So what I did in this bill is put in sort of a firewall that ensures that if money is transferred to the general fund, it does not take the money going to the land preservation programs below the 5-year average. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I ask for a favorable report.
Is Kevin Canale still here? He was favorable with amendment. I do not see him. Thank you, Grayson. While they're checking, are there any questions for the bill sponsor? Delegate Wu? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I looked at the fiscal note. Which 3 counties you said will pay more?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's Queen Anne's, Howard, and Montgomery, and I know 2 of those are yours.
I do think Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for the bill sponsor? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have unfavorables, Matthew Pipkin, Lisa May, Brian Anlu, Grayson Wiggins, and Lori Graff. I do not see Mr. Anlu anymore.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, my name is Matt Pipkin. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Multi-Housing Association, here requesting an unfavorable report on HB 342. You have my written testimony, so I'll just try to keep it brief. Currently, right now, multifamily housing sales are just collapsing, frankly, in the state of Maryland, and this bill would only exacerbate that problem. Earlier this year, we, along with AOBA, gave a state of the housing briefing with ENT. In it, we got data from CoStar that basically says that the sale price per unit has fallen to $161,000 per unit, below the 5-year average of $194,000. That's a 17% decline. You also have total sales volume has plummeted to $1.89 billion, which is below the 5-year average of $4.47 billion. That's a 58% decline. And you're seeing a rapid decline, especially in Prince George's and Montgomery County. Prince George's County had 27 multifamily sales in 2019. It is down to 8 for 2023 and 2024 combined. Additionally, we have some concerns whether or not this bill would run afoul with the uniformity and taxation provision within the Maryland Constitution that states that, by uniform rules provided by a separate assessment, classification and subclassification of land, improvements to land personal properties, that all taxes must be uniform throughout the class and the subclass. With that, I request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Lisa May on behalf of Maryland Realtors. It's been a hard time for home buyers in recent years. We've had limited supply, we've had rising interest rates, we've had rising home prices. And we believe to add increased transfer taxes on top of that would just make our housing problems even worse. It may be tempting to think that this bill is only hitting those who are more well off because the rates only go up for those properties over $500,000. But the average price in Maryland last year, the average home price was $498,000, and the median home price was about $430,000. And in many areas, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Howard County, you're talking about a typical home, and in some cases, even a modest home being above $500,000. And because this tax is not indexed to inflation, we are going to take in more and more homes each and every year that this is in place, particularly at the rate of appreciation we have seen for residential properties here in Maryland. So we really do have to caution against, adding even more prices and more taxes and more fees on top of an already unaffordable asset. And we do ask for your unfavorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lori Graff. I am the CEO of the Maryland Building Industry Association. Happy to be here today, testifying in respectful opposition to HB 342. I would like to echo what my colleagues have said. I would like to point out that transfer taxes are not financeable, so they are things that are just going to go on to the high transactional cost of buying a house. I also wanted to kind of paint a little picture about housing and the ecosystem that housing is. You have, I'm just going to use an example, you have somebody that buys, the Jones family, I'm just going to make it up, a Jones family buys a $300,000 house. They live in that house for a couple of years, then they're like, oh, I have a family, I'm gonna now buy a $600,000 house. They're gonna scrape together enough money to get a down payment for their $600,000 house. The advantage that brings to our society is that now you have a $300,000 house that is available for somebody else. If they're just gonna sit there and not purchase the more expensive house because of the transactional costs of moving and buying the new house, that $300,000 house is not on the market now. So there's a whole ecosystem of housing that we really need to take a look at when we're just looking at all of these issues. So with that, and I echo the issues with multifamily. Multifamily is just really struggling right now. We've got building energy performance standards and other standards that are really gonna be adding to the cost of housing, as well as we need investors in the state of Maryland, and that's another thing that my members are constantly telling me. So with that, I would like to ask for an unfavorable report.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. I would just echo my colleagues' thoughts and quickly note that from an employment perspective, this bill creates issues as well. The state has ranked pretty consistently in the 40th range, 40 to 45th among the 50 states in job growth percentage over the last few years. And the real estate industry is actually our largest private sector industry in the state. And so when we have fewer sales due to this policy, that will impact jobs. And for that reason, we're concerned. Thank you.
Any questions? All right, seeing none, this panel is dismissed. Have we heard from everyone who signed up for this bill? All right, seeing no other witnesses, that ends the hearing on House Bill 342. We will now call up House Bill 389, Delegate Polakovich-Carr, Property Tax Daycare Centers. Yes, please, thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Polakovich-Carr, here to present House Bill 389. Recently, Comptroller Brooke Clearman released a comprehensive report on the state of child care in Maryland. And from this report, it's clear that an essential industry in our state really is struggling. In just the past few years, we've lost more than 1,200 child care providers, which has resulted in a 5% decline in the overall number of children that can be cared for in licensed care in Maryland. And meanwhile, our state's child care workforce has shrunk by 26% in just 3 years. We also continue to see major financial struggles for both providers and families. Child care providers typically see a profit margin of less than 1%, but child care continues to be unaffordable for many families. In fact, the cost of care for an infant is more than the cost of tuition at College Park. We know that high-quality early education not only prepares our youngest learners for kindergarten, provides a lifetime of benefits. And that's why this committee has taken a number of actions over the years to promote early childhood education. Today, I'm asking the committee to revisit and reform some actions taken by our predecessors back in the 1980s. Back then, the legislature enabled counties and municipalities to offer property tax credits to child care providers, as well as to other types of businesses who have at least 25 employees who offer on-site child care. And to date, 4 counties have taken advantage of that enabling authority. Howard and Montgomery counties offer both types of credits, so both for the provider and for the businesses with on-site child care. Hartford County offers the business credit only, and more recently, Frederick County joined this list by creating a tax credit for child care providers. Notably, both types of property tax credits were limited in state law to just new construction or additions to child care facilities, and the credits don't include all types of child care providers. Consequently, the reach of these tax credits is pretty limited. For instance, in my county, in Montgomery County, just 5 child care providers received the tax credit in the most recent year. Given the overall dire state of child care in our state, it's time to broaden the enabling authority in state law This bill would give counties and municipalities the ability to offer property tax credits to more providers and other businesses that are providing on-site childcare. And importantly, the bill also increases the statutory cap on the how much credit is allowed. There's no fiscal note for the state, and because it's just enabling, the 4 jurisdictions that are already offering these credits would not have to change their credits. We're just trying to give everybody more options in order to help stabilize this essential industry. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to the sponsor for her leadership and to the awesome Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to testify in favor of House Bill 389. I'm Christina Push, Executive Director of the Maryland State Child Care Association. House Bill 389 includes important components that support the essential child care businesses, as child care is an economic driver, the fabric of the community, and the workforce behind the workforce. According to the Comptroller's recent State of the Economy, Maryland has seen a decline in the number of licensed child care, and they also state that child care providers operate at a tight profit margin, usually less than 1%, and Maryland needs to incentivize small businesses, especially child care, including large family child care businesses, and enabling the increase of the property taxes from the 1980s benchmark of $3,000 to align closer to current property tax expenditures, which HB 389 does, is a step in the right direction to a holistic public policy approach to supporting the declining child care businesses primarily owned and operated by women. MSCCA conducted a property tax questionnaire in the fall of 2024, asking members how much they paid in property tax last year. We had 76 businesses from 17 counties respond to provide some anecdotal data and research. We shared these results with our sponsor. We also asked if the respondents would support legislation to expand and increase property tax, and the answer was resounding yes. I'd like to share a few comments from the survey. It's a good start. With the increase in labor costs, this would be a good benefit. Taxes continue to go up, yet I don't see anything from my county to help childcare, and we need all the help we can receive in this difficult time. The Comptroller's State of the Economy series on childcare quotes, "Childcare is a fragile market that requires government intervention to enable small businesses to succeed." And I offer that childcare businesses enable more parents to work consistently and productively, therefore contribute to Maryland's economy. Small but important steps outlined in this bill will begin to make a difference to thousands of childcare businesses trying to survive and grow. MSCCA recommends a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Kennelly here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of the bill. A lot of the points I'd like to make have already been made in a very eloquent way. I'll just say that this does provide us more flexibility. It does provide us the ability to give a greater benefit if that's what a county wants to do. We very much appreciate the bill. We need to get, excuse me, more women back to work. We know that childcare is a big issue for everyone, but especially for women, and we've seen that decline. So we'd like to get that back. This provides us with more opportunities to provide these benefits, to keep these businesses open in our communities, and it does so with community input and, again, recognize that every county is not the same, and some of the circumstances in other counties may be different than the one here. So again, I very much appreciate the flexibility. This is a pragmatic way to solve, to help solve our child care crisis, and we'd ask for a favorable report.
Any questions for this panel? I do want to clarify one thing. So I was reading the fiscal note, and so this is an exemption that already exists, and the fiscal note specifically mentions that it'll include large family child care homes. It'll expand it. So it specifies large family child care homes. Do the small ones, are they're already included? Okay.
That's right.
Yes.
Madam Chair, yes. The smaller providers that are up to 8 kids are already have that exemption.
Got it. Great bill. Thank you. All right, I don't believe there's any unfavorable testimony, so if there aren't any other questions, we will conclude the hearing on House Bill 389. Thank you. Next up, I'm calling Delegate Feldmark for her 2 bills. We'll start with House Bill 550. This one is sponsor only.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. For the record, I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark. Pleased to be presenting House Bill 550. This is a bill that you have heard previously, so just to remind everyone, our county governing bodies have the authority already to create local public campaign financing programs. And 6 of our local jurisdictions have already established such programs. 3 of them have already implemented them. Starting with Montgomery County, first going through that in the 2018 election, and now having 2 election cycles under its belt. Howard County started in 2022, and most recently Baltimore City had public campaign financing for the 2024 elections. Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, and Prince George's County are all slated to begin their programs with the 2026 election. What this bill would do is allow those jurisdictions that have already been through at least 1 election cycle with the existing program to expand it to additional offices. So the existing authority is only for county level offices. So county council, city council, county executive mayor, right? What we want to do is for those jurisdictions that have already put a program in place, give them the authority, the option. No one has to do anything, right? But to give them the ability to expand that to state offices elected at the county level. So essentially we're talking about Board of Education and all of the courthouse offices. So circuit court judges, clerk of the court, register of wills, state's attorney, sheriff. And that's it. It does not require any jurisdiction to expand a program. It simply gives them the authority, and we are including that it has to be a county that already has a program up and running, so they have the experience and have that in place before they grow it. So with that, I will ask for your favorable report. Any questions?
Thank you, Delegate. Seeing no questions from the committee, that ends the hearing on House Bill 550. We'll move right into the final bill of the day, House Bill 525. Delegate Feldmark, we will call up, would you like your panel called up with you?
Sure. Actually, if I could have Mr. Demarinis join me for any questions, and then if other witnesses would like to join me, that's fine as well.
Perfect.
I'm not sure who wants to.
I'll go ahead and call favorables, if that works for you. Ben Yellen, Craig Holman, Kevin Canali, Alan Yang. There are also 2 virtual witnesses, which we'll hear from after this.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Again, for the record, I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark, here to present House Bill 525. So this bill deals with deep fakes. And as you know, as technology evolves and the tools to create deep fakes become more advanced and more accessible, the need for legislation addressing the use of deep fakes in our elections grows more pressing. As the technology gets better, the potential impact of the deception becomes more dangerous. And over the last several years, this committee has heard a variety of bills dealing with deep fakes. This bill takes a slightly different approach, building on our existing prohibitions on inappropriately influencing a voter's decisions. So in existing statute, it is already illegal to influence or attempt to influence a voter's decision to vote through the use of force, fraud, threat, menace, intimidation, bribery, reward, or offer of reward. It is also, in existing statute, already illegal to influence or attempt to influence a voter's voting decision. So this is how they vote or for whom they vote, right? Not whether or not to vote. Through the use of force, threat, menace, intimidation, bribery, reward, or offer of reward. Now, those two provisions are strikingly similar, but for those of you who were listening very carefully, which I'm sure is all of you, there's one question I know must be on everyone's mind right now, right? Why would fraud be prohibited for influencing a voter's decision to vote, but not be prohibited in influencing a voter's decision about how to vote? So I believe the most likely explanation is an oversight, and it's one that we should correct. Even if I'm wrong and it was not an oversight, if that was an intentional policy position, it's still one I believe we should correct. And so this bill does just that. It adds fraud to the list of prohibited means of influence for influencing a voter's decision on how to vote. And it specifies that fraud includes the use of synthetic media or deepfakes. So this is, a step towards dealing with deepfakes in our elections, and it's really using the existing structure and the existing statute and updating it to include this new problematic form of deception in our elections. So I ask for your favorable report. Mr. DeMarinis is here to assist with questions and have several witnesses to hear from as well. So I welcome your questions.
One of us just
go for it.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilkins and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Ben Yellen. I am the Program Director for Public Policy and External Affairs at the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Us and our legal researchers have spent a couple of years now, including working with members of the state Senate on issues related to artificial intelligence and deepfakes. And without reiterating what the delegate said in introducing the bill, I'll note that this is more than a theoretical problem. And I'll just give two brief examples. One of them occurred last year during New Hampshire's primary election, where New Hampshire Democratic voters received a robocall purporting to be from President Biden, instructing voters not to vote in that primary election. And it was a bit of a question as to whether President Biden would have wanted people to vote because he wasn't on the ballot in the New Hampshire primary. That was obviously fraudulent, and that was a use of artificial intelligence and synthetic media to mislead voters. The other example is more subtle, and this happened in the gubernatorial election in Indiana, where one of the candidates produced an ad from his campaign depicting the opposing candidate at a rally, and everybody at that rally was carrying a sign that said, "Ban gas stoves." As you can guess, that is not the actual sign that people at that rally were displaying. So that was also the use of synthetic media to mislead voters, which I think this common sense bill would seek to prevent.
And members of the committee, thank you for letting me testify. I'm Craig Homan, representing the almost 16,000 Maryland residents who are part of Public Citizen. We strongly support this legislation, and we've been working on similar legislation elsewhere throughout the country. We just saw in the 2024 election cycle was the first serious deepfake election cycle we've ever faced. There were more deepfakes distributed in federal, state, and local elections in that single election cycle than in all history before then. And what makes these deepfakes particularly dangerous is AI technology has become so refined that it's almost impossible to tell the difference between a computer-fabricated image and voice versus a real image and voice. And it makes them very, very persuasive. This bill, HB 525, follows a similar approach that the Federal Election Commission has just pursued. And in response to a petition that I filed with the FEC to include deepfakes under the fraudulent misrepresentation law, the FEC agreed. This bill is far better, though, than what the FEC's done. This bill actually defines a deepfake. It defines artificial intelligence, and then it narrows the focus of fraudulent misrepresentation on specifically deepfakes that target specific candidates with the intent to mislead voters and cause harm. So it not only covers AI, it actually narrows it down to the very, very deliberately deceptive and harmful form of AI. AI can be useful, but it becomes destructive when it's used to deceive voters.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in very strong support of this bill. Counties run and manage elections locally. Obviously, we have a stake in free, fair, and open elections. This is a common sense bill. As this technology gets better and better seemingly every day, I'm sure you've all seen these videos that are purporting to be someone that they're not, or someone is saying something that they obviously did not say. We see this as a common sense bill. Again, this is a bill designed to protect our voters, to protect our election infrastructure, and we'd ask for a favorable report.
Let me first actually make sure that I got everyone. Did Alan Lang come up? Oh, okay. Well, we'll get you on the next one then. I do have some questions. I think this is a really important bill, and I hope that we can get something done on this legislative session. The issue of deep fakes, it's so challenging that we have to make sure that we get the language fully right. So for our experts that are here, and I thank you for bringing some really great experts on this issue, the language that we have here, can we get a sense of, for other states that may have done this, is this similar? Where do we get these definitions from? And can you comment on, I can already see some ways that perhaps this definition, someone could get around it. For example, it talks about purporting a real or clearly identified candidate. I think it could be harmful if someone put forth a celebrity, for example, that's not a candidate, and had them saying something, you know, I endorse Janelle Wilkins for president, and that person is not depicting a real candidate, but that might fall through the cracks of this bill. I also think that there could be a couple other ways that someone might be able to get around this definition. So we can talk more about the definition, where we got it from, and comment on the potential loophole that I just mentioned.
Glad to talk about what other states are doing. Prior to this election cycle, there were only 4 states that had any type of regulation of deepfakes in elections. And 2 of them just banned deepfakes altogether. 2 others required disclosure of deepfakes. But as we went through the 2024 election cycle, it became clear to many, many voters how dangerous deepfakes can be and how deceptive. So there are now 20 states that have regulations of deepfakes in elections. Most of them focus on campaign finance laws. This pursues the same avenue that the Federal Election Commission is pursuing, and that's focusing on fraud. It has a higher bar. You've got to prove very intentional deception and intent to cause harm than with the campaign finance law, but this appropriately addresses the most damaging of the deepfakes.
Madam Chair, if I may, I think you raised a good point here, and I'm certainly, I would consider that a friendly amendment, you know, if it's a matter of refining this definition and sort of tightening what we see as, you know, potentially damaging deception.
Perfect, thank you. I think if we can just put our heads together and go back to the definition to make sure it's as strong as possible so that we're really getting to all of the potential deep fakes, I think we'll be able to figure something out so we can move a deep fake bill forward. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, Delegate Hornberger?
Yeah, I'm going to go with an anecdote here that impacted a Maryland election based on the definitions that you've shared. And I'm just reading from an Axios article here. So reads, Democrats boosting a hard right Republican gubernatorial candidate in Maryland are targeting a particular brand of voter to basically impact the primary election. And the motive here was that by meddling in the primary, and they did this in multiple states, they would elevate far right-wing candidates that seemed less electable in the general. So that's basically, you have an organization who's paying for ads and saying, with, in a very forthright manner, that they're doing so to impact an election via deceit. So based on the definition that you've just shared there, would this scenario, which happened here in Maryland, qualify under those guidelines?
I'm sorry, was it using synthetic media?
Yes. Yeah, so they did targeted videos on social media, and it cites that in the article as well. Let me read that.
So, do you know?
I guess one.
So the ads, I'll just read it. The ads specifically include Facebook and Instagram users involved in practices that are more likely to reach conservative voters.
So I guess that's a factual question about whether fraud was involved in the elements of fraud. But the fact that, campaigns reach certain voters is not fraudulent in and of itself. And the fact that a political party, whether Democrat or Republican, reaches out to, say, other members or the general public to influence their voting is also not fraudulent in any manner. So it would have to be something that the party or an individual did in a fraudulent manner using synthetic media, or just in that case there, that would change a voting opinion. So, I think that your scenario there is too generic and would not necessarily fall in it, because you can say target someone and say, this is the true blue or true red in there, because that's a strategic element that they want to do. But as long as it's not fraudulent in their methods or what they're saying, then it would not be covered under this.
So to put a finer point on this, the video itself may not be a fraudulent. In other words, it may not be a deep fake video as qualifies as what you've done here in the bill, but their intent is to, via these videos, influence an election by defrauding people. So is there a bright line between the actual video itself and the intent? Because the organization that paid for the ad is saying that they're trying to influence the outcome of the election via duping potential voters on the other side.
I guess the thing is, I think, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
I think like the idea that you're saying that they're duping is not the correct term, because then basically any sort of campaign material then would be considered duping. Negative ads would be considered duping across the board there. And I think that that's, a campaign strategy and would be reflected as such. But I don't necessarily want to speak for the state prosecutor's office. Again, these are very fact-specific scenarios, and would be, because of where it's labeled and the high bar, it has to be knowingly and willfully for fraudulent manners there to influence, and the practice of deception, which already we have defined influence that's already there with pressure, deception, trickery. So these are things that are already in current law and can be looked at.
Okay, I would say that I respectfully disagree. Obviously, someone played in the election here to influence the outcome of the election based on deceiving voters. And the result, which we have, these are very hard terms to define in a court of law when we say, the deceptive and things of that nature. So I'm concerned about this scenario, and I'm just curious of how the bill that you've proposed impacts it. Thank you.
Delegate Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a few questions. Madam Chair, I might just do two, and I might ask for a second bite of the apple, so that way I don't take up too much time. My question first and foremost has to do with free speech. I see a very real overlap with political satire, specifically, the old cartoons in the newspaper, with the difference being obviously that the medium has changed and the quality has changed. But under this definition of fraud, fraud includes use of synthetic media. Synthetic media is, in my opinion, fairly broadly defined to a certain extent. But in the circumstance of a newspaper that has political satire, they are willfully and knowingly trying to influence who I vote for. And so my question here is, how does this correlate, or how do you reconcile that longstanding practice with the definitions herein?
I believe part of the language is that the depiction is indistinguishable from a real person, whether it's the candidate or individuals behind the candidate in that type of scenario. So the element of it being indistinguishable would cover scenarios where you're talking about things like art, cartoons, satire, et cetera.
So to the point of indistinguishable, I would then adjust the hypo to be a circumstance of an Instagram page whose whole focus is a political satire that is indistinguishable. That, I mean, I might know it's satire, it's the onion, so to speak, right? But in that circumstance, how do we then reconcile with this bill? All right, we'll come back to that one.
Well,
go ahead, Madam.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think if you look at lines 8 through 11, right, producing a fundamentally different understanding or impression of an individual's appearance, speech, or conduct than a reasonable individual would have from the unaltered original video. If it's satire, its intent is not to make you think it's real, right? Satire is intended to make fun of and make a point, right? So I do think there is a distinction there.
I agree. I think the courts is where that decision gets made, and that's where my challenge is. The second question, I might could just roll the second question into one, and then I'll be done, which is having to do with a candidate's own image, their own voice and likeness. And the specific example, it goes back to an Instagram, but if you were using 11 Labs and you were making your own avatar, and that avatar was pushing out your messaging to a certain extent, and then a robocall, the only difference I think between this bill and the old robocalls is the use of AI to create said robocall. One might argue that you should be able to do that with your own candidacy, which under this bill would still be kind of, I think, caught up in the purported depiction of a real candidate, right? Even if that candidate is yourself. So would that be something that we could look at, especially, with an authority line already existing? I think that might be something that we could probably allow for under the correct circumstances. Could I get a response on just that perspective?
I mean, I'm certainly open to working on that. If I'm understanding correctly, you're saying if rather than actually recording a robocall, you used AI to make the recording that sounds like you without actually making a fresh recording. Is that?
Essentially, yes.
Essentially. I mean, I think that's certainly something we could discuss for amendment. It's the will of the committee. I would not be opposed to that.
Understood. Thank you for taking my question.
Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for bringing the bill. I absolutely understand the intent of the bill, and correct, some of this has gotten really scary, and we've dealt with this even from some of the criminal aspect of it. so the protection is there. And so my questions are actually along my colleagues. One was, younger people today evidently have a very different sense of humor and style and way of doing things than I do, because half the time I don't get it, and I don't know if it's just because I'm old or I'm like too sensitive or whatever. So if you're doing memes or you're doing things like that, or that seem very real, or they're altering it to influence it, I completely agree that, it's a very different world where we are right now. And so I think from the legal standpoint, who makes the judgment? You said, would it be up to the courts? And then to Madam Vice Chair's perspective, do we have the right definitions? Because who's making the distinction? Who's making the judgment on things like that? And then the other point is, what if a candidate is doing themselves and misrepresenting themselves as, like I could do a Photoshop where I look completely, completely different. Maybe the two misrepresent myself. I don't know. But that's kind of my two things. What if the candidate's doing themselves, and then who's making the judgments and distinctions?
So I guess I can answer that and I'll pass it along. And it also goes to Delegate Young's question too. I think the focus on the definition is one element there, but it's just a tool. Like AI, deep fakes, they're tools. So is photoshopping and altering images. In and of itself, that is not illegal. And this bill does not purport this to make that illegal. You can use all those tools. You can alter anything, you can change anything. It's adding a new element to, I guess, prosecution. And it has to be willfully and knowingly a fraudulent act. So the bar is not the use of the tool of using deep fakes. It is committing a fraud. So it would be like if a candidate wanted to sue under libel or anything like that. So it's just saying you used AI to commit libel, right? You're using this tool to commit something else. So it's just it's just saying this is the element now, is that if a fraudulent activity is used to change a voter's decision, right? If you use the tool AI, or if you use the tool of deepfake, then the prosecution can look at that and say, this was the tool in order to use it. Just like you can say right now, that I never said that, so I'm going to sue you for libel because you took a recording and used a deepfake of my voice to say something completely different. So I think that's where the difference is on this here. So that if a person wants to use the tool for a parody or to create, a meme where it's like, something outrageous, that's not fraudulent. That, or if the candidate gets upset about that, the elements still have to be then proven for fraudulent activity. And that's a high bar and moving forward for a prosecution to go forward with it. If a candidate wants to use their tools for themselves, that's not fraudulent because the candidate is authorizing that activity. And so that's kind of, I think, the distinction here. It's just making a definition as what constitutes these things in the toolbox.
Also, the language of the bill has a harm requirement, so that comes into play when you're talking about depicting oneself. You have to be causing a legally cognizable harm to another person.
And I'd like to point out that these laws against election fraud, both here in Maryland and at the federal level, have been on the books for a long time. And they're generally not abused. I mean, you won't find a prosecutor trying to prosecute someone for doing a bad joke, for instance, because it just doesn't meet that standard that you expect out of election fraud.
Okay, the Vice Chair, and then we do have two more folks that are testifying on this bill, folks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have to come back around, and my question is actually building on Delegate Miller's question. We're on a similar wavelength. I think that in order for us to address this issue, we probably need to do more than putting in code this type of fraud, but have more of a process. And I wanted to ask Mr. Demarinis, it sounds like we need someone to mitigate if this fraud has happened or not happened. So perhaps someone reports it, whether it is the candidate or an outside person, and there needs to be someone there that says, yes, this is violating the law, no, this is not violating the law. Perhaps it goes to the state prosecutor's office. Can you comment on how you would foresee in terms of process, the decision-making on if this is being violated and what that process could look like, and if SBE would be the first place you think to mitigate this in terms of adhering to what would be written in the law, or if this is something that would go straight to the state prosecutor or somewhere else?
So it would probably go, it could go directly to the state prosecutor automatically for a complaint under Title 16. Or it would come into the State Board of Election, at which point we would either review it and could refer it up to the state prosecutor's office or forward it along. But, you know, Title 16 provisions are enforced with the state prosecutor's office. That's why it's knowingly and willfully. That's the bar.
Well, colleagues, there's at least one more bill on this topic regarding deep fakes. So I know there's a lot of discussion and questions around it. So I just wanted to encourage everyone for us to come together and figure out in a bipartisan manner how we could work to ensure that our communities are safe from these deep fakes and intimidation and fraudulent practices. Thank you.
Okay, if I could ask Mr. Lang to step forward. Yep.
It'll be quick.
Okay.
I said everything I would have said, so.
Okay. Okay.
Actually far better than I would have said.
We have Margaret Durkin with us virtually.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Margaret Durkin, and I'm the Mid-Atlantic Executive Director with TechNet, a technology trade association. Thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak today on House Bill 525 related to deepfakes in elections. We believe that creators of political content that includes material deceptive media should have an obligation to provide a clear disclosure, and we appreciate the intent of this bill and the overarching premise. TechNet and its member companies want to ensure that bad actors are held liable and ultimately accountable, and not the platform or online service that may have been used to distribute such deceptive media. As such, in my written remarks that I submitted to the committee, we are requesting a series of exemptions that align with Section 230 in the federal code, such as interactive computer service, internet service provider, and others that are listed in my remarks. We also believe that an effort to combat these deepfakes via cybersecurity and anti-fraud efforts should also be exempted, and I would refer members of the committee to my written remarks for that specific language. I appreciate your consideration of our concerns, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Durkin. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 525, and that concludes the Ways and Means bill hearings for today. In 5 minutes, subcommittee chairs and Delegate Buckle, I'd like to see you in the back.